And welcome back to day 2 of WordPlay 2021, Hanley Society's 9th annual festival celebrating narrative games. If you missed yesterday, the theme for this year's festival is comedy, so we'll be showcasing some funny games and fun talks. But that's enough from me. Let's jump right into it.
Hi, I'm Len Predko. I'm the Executive Director of Hand-Eye Society, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for WordPlay 2021. We're super excited to show you all of these games and talks, and I want to say a really big thank you to both Ontario Creates and Clever Endeavor for helping support WordPlay. Have a good time. We'll see you at the end.
Okay, we need to get real honest for a second. My mom wants me to advertise this game to like kids and to pet websites. How do I tell her that there's cocaine in the game? There's a dog who talks about Happy Salt. He's got a big Texan hat, and he's just like, there was a lot of Happy Salt around in the 80s, and you don't know what 80s he's talking about, because dogs didn't run airports in the 80s, and also there's just straight up a dog who says cocaine isn't legal if a dog does it. Which, again, he's not wrong, because laws don't apply to dogs. These dogs are having some existential nightmares because they're exposed to the entire cosmos of space. I don't know how to explain my mom, but there's absolutely a dog who says it's not illegal to do cocaine.
He got the silliest dream they'd ever heard. They said he wanted to become a knight.
The swordless knight that changed the fate of the kingdom for the rest of eternity. Adderson, the Beast Slayer! Was he actually doing cartwheels?
Adderson, son of Gerfaza, the upper fields right here for you. All day, every day. I'm just your run-of-the-mill prairie buck, man. Whoa.
For your information, everyone already thinks that Rose are thick-skulled.
You're many, many things, dear, but subtle is not one of them.
That's it! Her butt! Did he talk about anyone's butt?
How can a country boy with ambitions as great as yours go on living, knowing he can't aspire to more than his deplorable life?
Farmhands don't become knights.
Then I guess the only question I've got left is this going anywhere at all?
Do I have to say yes or no to get out of here alive?
Oh, Adder! Smooch! Smooch! Smoochy!
I'll go first. My high place phobia is sad, bad, and a tad mad.
What kind of game is this?
In Glom, players have 3 minutes to create a Glom. Rewrite the phrase while following the rule and try to meet the goal.
No!
Players that break the rule or use any of the words in the phrase are disqualified.
What?
And the player who best met the goal wins the round. That's it.
Each word.
Each word.
It doesn't have to start with an S, it has to.
What if I spell it wrong?
Glom is simple to play, trivial to teach, and the base deck alone includes over 30,000 possible rounds.
No N's?
Yeah.
That means novella is out.
I get.
Damn it!
Anyone can win a game of Glom, but being good at Glom is a life skill, and being bad at Glom is pretty fun too, which makes it perfect for parties, families, and even classrooms.
That's it! Subsequent!
You had 3 whole minutes.
I know!
One more time.
Hi, and welcome to Role Playing Comedy, or Letting the player have the last laugh. My name is Martin Hanses. I will be doing this little talk today, thanks to the fine people over at WordPlay. And yeah, this is going to be about an hour-long discussion and look into how you can design and write dialogues in your games that kind of facilitate the player feeling as though they are the active, the funny, and the creative person, rather than just presenting the player with jokes. So before I get into it, just a quick introduction. I am a writer and a narrative designer on video games. I've been in the industry for a while, done a lot of contracted writing and design work, almost entirely within the indie scene. And I'm currently writing and directing a not yet announced project at Eggnut, the makers of Backbone. I'm also solo developing the stand-up comedy RPG Clam Man 2, which I'll get into in a second. And beyond that, I just make tons of little, tiny, goofy, experimental, weird games that I just enjoy doing that. And when it comes to games that I play and inspire me, or hobbies that I have, I play pretty much anything. Usually what I try to do is play the opposite of whatever game I'm working on at the moment, which then includes RPGs, fast FPSs, puzzle games, and strategy. I'm also a massive fan of tabletop role-playing games. I generally prefer DMing or GMing, whatever you want to call it, which is running the game, over playing in it, but I am lucky enough to also get to play in a bunch of different games every week with a variety of systems. So before we continue on, because Clam Man 2 is such a central part of this talk, or the whole reason why I looked into all this and did all this research, I think it deserves a quick introduction because I'll be using terms from it and a description of it. So it is the follow-up to Clam Man 1, obviously, which is a short linear point-and-click game that I made way, way, way back. Clam Man 2 is absolutely massive by comparison, being a narrative RPG. The core interaction of the game is still dialogues, along with exploration and dice rolls, and some amount of customization in stats in your character. Dice rolls, again, came directly from my love of tabletop games, and in my opinion is one of the most important mechanics in the game. So in Clam Man 2, despite the odd name, you are trying to become a comedian. You are a character who kind of rejects their day job and decide to become a comedian, or they thrust upon this world of being comedian. Specifically, the way you do that is by exploring the world, talking to people, doing little quests, and being rewarded for said quests by getting certain jokes. Jokes are loot in the game, and you use them at the end of each in-game day to perform in front of an audience. The joke telling itself is very simple. You just drag kind of jokes out to the audience, and then you roll the dice and you see whether or not you succeed. And your chances of succeeding are affected by your stats and the modifiers and the difficulty of the joke. And all of these jokes correspond to specific stats. Those stats, because I've been talking about them a lot, are detection, improv, self-awareness, and aquadynamics. Aquadynamics because you play as a clam and you're underwater in the whole game. It's SpongeBob rules. Those stats were also kind of chosen or created based on certain aspects of comedy and specifically stand-up comedy. There are aspects of performing in certain ways that certain comedians have that are, to me at least, a variety of ways that can be concentrated into these 4 stats. It's observational humor, it's physical humor, it's self-deprecating humor, etc., etc. So, with Clam Man 2 out of the way, why would you do this? Why would you want the player to be the funny person? Why would you not just want to entertain the player? Well, to get into that, we got to go into comedy in games a little further. Now, comedy is obviously a very subjective thing, and it's rarely completely omitted from any piece of media, so we're always going to see jokes in pretty much anything we play. Some games, however, do put a little bit more focus on it. Early point-and-click games more so than anyone else, perhaps. And on that note, The Secret of Monkey Island, the LucasArts title from, oh man, I don't remember the year right now. It's one of the oldest games that I've played that really got comedy in a video game right. Not the first, maybe, but it's definitely a turning point in video game writing. I'll be bringing up examples why I think that later on. Nowadays, or in the modern times, we're seeing something of a resurgence of comedy games, but or a resurrection in a more concentrated form. We're starting to see pure comedy games. Games like Accounting Plus, An Airport for Alien Run by Dogs, Dr. Langus of the Tiger, and the Terribly Cursed Emerald, A Whirlwind Heist, which is a mouthful of game. These are games where mechanical gameplay is almost completely omitted in favor of just kind of going for jokes. Playing the game mechanically isn't necessarily fun, but the reward for playing the game is funny. Or you are playing the game because it is funny, not fun. You do this, you're rewarded by a joke. That's not to say that I'm trying to put down these games at all. Not at all. I think this is incredibly valid design. I think these games can be super, super fun. It's just a particular aspect or approach to design. They're theme park rides. You strap in, you go for a ride, you get told jokes. They are walking simulators. They are passive games. It's interesting that walking simulator was this derogatory term for games like Dare Esther, and now they've become their whole genre. So obviously people want to play them. I saw someone refer to them as exploration games, which I think is... I mean, genre names is silly in general in games, but exploration is more positive than walking simulator. They are passive games, if you will. Then there's the meme comedy games, and I'm not using that term to diminish quality. It's just that they are wackier, they're weirder, they are less narratively funny and more mechanically funny. Oftentimes they're simulators like Goat Simulator, Granny Simulator, Who's Your Daddy. These are games that do something similar to what we're going to be talking about. They set the player up to be a funny person, but it's not through writing necessarily, not through narrative. It's oftentimes through wonky mechanics or goofy animations or odd scenarios or just kind of glitchy physics. A lot of people enjoy these games through streamers or Let's Players because they are specifically made to kind of make the player be funny. You know, make your own fun with this game. By interacting with this game, you are creating comedy. You are creating something humorous. You see an extension of that also in just about any open world game. The more outlandish the settings or mechanics, the better, because that enables player creativity and player expression rather than telling set stories. A game like Just Cause does that excellently. You can tether helicopters to your car and then go flying and swing it into an oil rig and explodes, and it's just weird and fun and crazy and funny. Whereas an open world game like Red Dead Redemption will focus way more on a grounded narrative that it specifically wants to tell you. Again, like none of these games are bad or worse than the other. They are just different in design. I personally really enjoyed Red Dead Redemption 2, especially. Mostly, though, when we're talking about comedy and fun things or funny things in games, if you look up top 10 funniest games of all time, the games that people consider to be the funniest are usually non-comedy or non-comedy games. And what I mean by that is games that aren't necessarily meant to be funny, but they have this added layer of comedy to them. This is typical because, you know, as soon as you set up a joke, people are anticipating it. You go into a comedy game expecting it to be funny, and you're immediately judging it by this very high standard. It's this thing of stand-up comedians not wanting to be introduced as the funniest person in the room, the funniest guy in the world, so and so and so, because it adds the pressure. And as soon as you tell someone you're funny, well, you're going to go to a party and someone's going to be like, oh, hey, you're a funny guy, right? Come on, tell a joke. And nobody wants that. Everyone hates that. It's awful. It's horrifying. It doesn't matter what you say unless you subvert it completely, because when you tell a joke, then, yeah, that's what you were set up to do. They said you were funny, you told a joke. Good. That was that. These are games that are mechanically focused on something else. They are the good games that are additionally funny. Go to something like, go back to 2007 and read reviews of Portal 1, and you'll find that just about everyone in their reviews, well, they mention that the puzzling is really great and really fun and really interesting, but everyone will say, I was also blown away and so surprised by how funny this game was. Nobody was expecting Portal to be funny. They didn't market it as a comedy game. It was just a shadow drop puzzler in the orange box. Some of the funniest games of all time are competent games, even without the comedic element. And again, that's differing from that first example we took up, where we brought up, which is a game that is specifically designed to make you laugh. Now, it's still going to make you laugh. It's still going to be a very, very funny game. But there is a very different kind of approach there, both in design and both from the audience with regards to expectation. So why bother making the effort to ensure that the player is the funny actor? Clearly, these games have an audience. They are popular, and people want to see them and play them. So why go into all this trouble of that I'm talking about now, about switching things up and making the player the comedian? Well, there are 4 reasons. One of them very specific. In my case, it's because of role-playing. In Clanman 2, you are a stand-up comedian, or you try to become one at the very least. But what other reasons are there? So, first of all, let me see here. Games are interactive. That is a self-evident truth that we're going to hear all the time in game design talks. Games are interactive. Narrative games have a tendency to be less mechanical than other genres, and oftentimes boil down to clicking the continue button or holding right for 5 hours. And that's fine. That is valid design and an approach that works for certain games. I think, and throughout what we're going to be talking about today, there are ways we can enrich those same mechanics with some minor design changes and a different approach to writing, and in the process kind of provide players with more of a power fantasy. That's the second point. A lot of games are power fantasies. That doesn't have to mean strength or violence, but it is the act of living a certain fantasy. The Sims is built to cater to our fantasies. Pretty much every role-playing game ever is built to cater to a specific fantasy. And Euro Truck Simulator lets you live a certain fantasy. You get to do the thing that you want to do, and it feels good to get to do the thing that you want to do. It feels good to be the smartest, strongest, or most empathetic, or kindest, or the most reliable person in the room. And we can apply that to comedy as well, and hopefully create a game that allows you to become the funniest person in the room. And I think there is a want for that. Just think about every time people play role-playing games in fantasy worlds, medieval fantasy, I mean. How many people make the swashbuckling rogue who's sarcastic and snide and kind of funny but has a heart of gold? It's people want to be clever. Fourth, and this is a little weird, extroversion tempers expectation. And what I mean by that is that the more passive the player is, the less meaningful input they have in your game, the less likely they are to care or be susceptible to your jokes. An active player will be in on the joke, whereas a passive player is more likely to disregard it or worse, ridicule it. If you ever watch a streamer or YouTuber who has typically very comedic content, they crack jokes and such, if they try to play a comedy game, the game is presenting them with jokes, and they're putting them in that situation of being a comedian watching comedy, and then they have to create additional content on top of that joke. And what often happens, like I said, is kind of ridicule. You're kind of going like, haha, funny joke game, good job. And that doesn't mean that the joke was bad. It's just there is a certain amount of distancing there because you are just presenting a joke. Again, worst case scenario, but it's not unlikely. Comedy requires a certain amount of buy-in from the player, regardless of how good a joke is. And besides, this essentially just means you need to write engaging writing, which you should be doing regardless. So how do we do that? How do we make the player feel like the comedian? There are a few techniques and processes that I've found worked for me, and depending on your game, may work for you as well. There are techniques that are also found in games like Disco Elysium, The Outer Worlds, some Fallout titles, RPGs in general. But hopefully throughout this talk, I'll be able to isolate them and define some of them a little bit more clearly. Before we get into that, though, I'm going to be going over some direct examples of philosophy or design approaches that will help in this case. So the approaches and techniques that we're going to be talking about later on are all based on a few fundamental design philosophies, like I said. The first one is letting the player be creative. The second, letting the player be subversive. The third, letting the player fight the game. Fourth is not hogging the spotlight. And the fifth is letting the player maintain integrity. And the way we do these things is, well, we'll get into it. Furthermore, there is another important note before we get into anything that will kind of open up the discussion about dialogue options and presenting choice in game. That is that dialogue options are non-diegetic. This is very, very, very important. What that means, diegetic means something that exists within the piece of media you find it in. So if you are watching a movie and you hear Purple Rain playing in the background because a character is listening to Purple Rain in that scene, then Purple Rain is diegetic. Dialogue options are non-diegetic. They are things that exist in the game, but not in the context of the game, and not in the world of the game. They exist outside of the narrative of the game. They are little cheat sheets and cue cards for the player. A game doesn't remember a dialogue line that wasn't said, with one or two exceptions, maybe in like Virtue's Last Resort or whatever. And after a dialogue choice has been chosen, the others are disregarded for the rest of that playthrough. So in that moment, you only said the one thing, and nothing else happened. Those other dialogue options, they are gone forever until you restart the game. Again, this is incredibly important because it means that they are disconnected from the game. It means that they can begin to feel like player input, as if hitting A to jump in a platformer. I don't think that I need to hit A to jump. I just think I need to jump, and I jump. I assume ownership of that jump. And in the same way with the dialogue option, the player is going to assume ownership of that option that they choose. That's why people who play Fallout New Vegas will say, I went to Caesar's Legion, I told them to jump off a cliff. I went here, I did this, I told this person that, I told her that, I told them this, and I did that to him. Some people will like to maintain distance to the character by saying things like, referring to their character as my shepherd, or, my shepherd would do this, my shepherd was tough but fair. But even so, they are still assuming ownership of the options and the paths that they have chosen in the game. And that is the whole point of role-playing. You are assuming ownership of a path and a choice because that is the one you want. That is one that you feel is the most fitting. I'm bringing this up because this is the main form of interaction in narrative RPGs, aside from taking actions with in-game mechanics such as combat or exploration or platforming, etc., etc. In conversations, though, dialogue options are the single main form of interaction. And they are so underutilized as a medium in modern games. And in my opinion, and hopefully once this talk is over, I'll have explained why I think that. So let's get started on the ways, finally, in which you can make the player feel like they are the creative, funny person and didn't have 5 hours to think of that good line like you did. We'll start off with something very simple, which is flavor. So whenever intent or substance is clear, you go for style. I'll explain what this means. Role-playing games, or any game with branching dialogues and narratives, have through the years kind of amassed this predefined lingo that is used directly in-game. Consider how many times you've heard something like, tell me about yourself, let me ask you about something else, that's all I needed to know. These aren't bad lines. They're not bad writing. They're essentially part of video game literacy at this point. They work because they function as a kind of diegetic instruction to where you want the conversation to go. You are manipulating a dialogue tree. And players have seen these lines and have an understanding of where they are and how they are being used. And their intent is immediately crystal clear because we've been so conditioned to understand them. And, obviously, they say exactly what they do. But when we look at these, the intent is there. The intent is in what is being said here. even though they are very kind of mechanical in use. There are other cases where the intent and context is immensely clear, regardless of the dialogue line, or with just a slight hint towards it. And in these cases, we can flavor them to an almost unrecognizable degree. So compare something like "see you later" to "oh man, looks like it's time for me to vanish forever. Later. Goodbye." It's not a huge change, right? Like it's just like a little bit of flavoring, but a lot of games tend to omit this type of flavor. A writing like this, especially whenever it comes to context and intent clear dialogue options, gives the player the chance to be consistently more memorable, more funny, and feel like they are being creative. It's important to remember, obviously, that this is within reason. You don't want to change every single dialogue line into something weird or goofy or creative, because that'll just feel like overkill. Let me give you another example of this with a little bit more context and a little bit more specificity to it. Is that a word? So, imagine a fantasy game that you are playing. You are Groznan, the orc hunter, and you have just spoken to the war chief of your community. You've had a long, serious conversation about lore, NPCs, etc., yada yada. And finally, the war chief says this: "I wish you great luck on the hunt, Groznan. May it be fortuitous, and may your skin receive many a scar." This is the end of the conversation. It's incredibly clear to you as a player that this is the war chief saying goodbye. Not if not just by this line, then by the dialogue lines that you are given in return. And if it's a halfway decent RPG, it's going to offer you some amount of choice here, such as "luck, I need no luck. My blades are strong and my tusks are sharp." Or "to you as well, O great war chief. I will do you proud." Or simply an option to respectfully bow and leave the tent without a word. Going back to what we were saying about being creative or interesting, what if we also offered this choice? "Yeah, I can't wait to fuck a goblin." So you're probably kind of wondering here, why would you offer that choice? That's fair. This is a very extreme example. But the point here is that every role-playing game, invariably, will have dialogue choices that do not matter outside of the player's investment. Not every line of dialogue in your game will be tracked across the whole game. Some options are just there for flavor. There is no point for the game to track 1 out of 5 ways in which you said hello to every NPC, because it is excessive. You don't need that. The player certainly doesn't need that either. Choices should be interesting. So whenever we offer a choice that is specifically for role-playing, that is specifically for the creativity of the player and not really for any mechanical reason, it should be fun. If you want your player to say goodbye to the war chief, let them do that in the most outlandish way possible. There are tropes in video game writing, and we want to try to subvert them or change them up. So when you let the player choose how to do that through dialogue, it's going to be more rewarding for everyone. If the player has to express a single intent in the dialogue, let them express that intent in the most creative way you can offer them. Because when you do, you let the player feel creative. Again, this ties back to the dialogue option being a non-diegetic tool. It is a cue card. When you choose a dialogue option, you assume ownership of it. You take it, and it makes it feel like you said it. Think about how many times people will talk about games that they played where they say, "I did this, I did that." It's because in play, it is you. And the beauty then, if you're looking at that prior dialogue option and being like, that's going to ruin the mood and feeling of my game. Well, first of all, it's a very excessive example, obviously. But that's also the beauty of multiple choice dialogue, is that the player can choose the one they want. If they don't like it, they can just raise an eyebrow and move on. They still get to play their character the way they want. Disco Elysium did this really well, in that they let you be a disaster of a human being. That was on their marketing material, and they really delivered on that. You had this whole world of kind of normalcy, and they allowed the player to be the fun, wacky, crazy character in that game. So, moving on, something that's a little similar but kind of taking it a little bit further, and we're going to go into the details of why it does that. This is the Bard line, which is what I've called it. So to explain that, comedy is all about subversion and the unexpected, right? It is a joke isn't funny if you know it's coming. So how can you translate that subversion and that unexpectedness into gameplay? Well, for me, in a narrative game, I drew inspiration from playing tabletop RPGs. Obviously, surprise, surprise. I've been mentioning them like 50 times already. I don't know how well anyone watching this can relate. I'm pretty sure a lot of people at this point play tabletop role-playing games. And if they don't, maybe they watch shows like Critical Role. It certainly kind of entered into the collective nerddom to play tabletop RPGs. Regardless, very, very often during decision making and responses or tense moments in tabletop role-playing games, the bard usually, or someone, will blurt out a kind of joke answer, which is then shortly followed by, no, I'm just joking around. Or not even that, or it's just followed by everyone laughing and then kind of resuming the tension of the situation. Everyone laughs, game goes on. It's just kind of this fun moment to relieve the tension a little bit. So what I started experimenting with was having that as a kind of expression and a kind of comedy in game. And that means that while writing, I have to be the bard. And I don't mind that because I really enjoy writing dialogue. I love writing dialogue trees more than I like writing in general. And oftentimes, if I'm writing a choice or a part of a conversation and something comes into my mind of, oh, this would be funny to do here or to say here, I try to go with that because, well, one, it's an unexpected and weird action and joke you can take. It offers a creative choice and creative expression for the player. But also, chances are that if it's a weird thing that pops into my head, it's going to pop into someone else's head as well. And then when they see that line, it's going to feel great. So again, let's go back to Groznan. Go back to that fantasy game. So let's say that you, playing Groznan, are visiting an orc gardener. They show you their most prized possession, which is this fancy, awesome golden seed that will sprout into a beautiful fruit tree, but only when the moon is the third state of whatever, and the kids are playing something or the other, and my shoes are blue, etc., like magic, fantasy crap. And they extend that seed, and it's a very like sort of amazing moment where they're showing this cool thing that they have, and these are the options you, as the player, has. Firstly, you can inspect the seed, which is simple enough, perception check. Second, it will feed many mouths. You have done well to cultivate it. Kind of a positive feedback. 3, seed, fruit, you think are people critters dirtying themselves on the forest floor. Which is kind of a negative approach. And then the 4th one, which is take the seed and shove it in your mouth. Now, option 4 here is obviously the bard line. This is the one that you joke about doing, but you don't actually do it. Here's the thing, though. If we take the bard line into the game, in this case, we begin to offer that as a valid choice. And when we do that, there are already 3 levels of payoff. Firstly, there's the reveal. The player will read the dialogue options like we did just now, and hopefully kind of crack a smile or exhale through the nose at the 4th one. That's as much of a laugh you generally get. It's a joke in and of itself. You weren't expecting that to be part of the dialogues, and that's the first payoff. It's just a weird thing to do, and it's like, okay, sure. But then they think about it, and they realize that, wait, hang on, that is actually an option, and when I hover my mouse over it, it goes darker. Does that mean that I can actually choose that? Obviously, they don't think about all that in that point, but it's a realization that, wait, it's not just a joke, that's an actual option. So there's this nervous kind of intrigued kind of amusement here that, like, should I do that? This is the point where the person you're playing the game with will tell you, no, pick that one, pick the weird one, eat the seed. It's going to be great. This is the point where the Twitch chat tells the streamer, like, eat the seed, do it. This hinges quick caveat here. This hinges on the fact that you need to have proven in your game that these choices actually do matter. If it's just a sort of, you try to snatch the seed and the gardener just kind of grabs it back and say, hey, what's the matter with you? It's not the same kind of payoff. Thirdly, there's the rush. They go with the joke. They decide, okay, all right, okay, if I can eat the seed, I'm going to eat the seed. And they commit. The player commits to that, and now they own that action. Now they have chosen to do that thing. And they want to see if that actually does something, and they're willing to venture into unknown territory. Us human beings, we have a grounded view of reality, and from that we create a set of expectations and a frame of reference for interacting with people in the world. If I ask someone, hey, what's your name? My assumption is that they're going to tell me a name. If I ask someone, what can you tell me about this place? My assumption is that maybe they'll tell me how old the building is, or what kind of trees grow here, etc., etc. You have a general frame of reference. If a friend comes to you and shows you a cool magical seed and you eat it, well, chances are that's not an experience that you've had before. Chances are that's not something that you've done. So you are without frame of reference here. And that's golden for you as a writer, as the developer of this game, because now they have committed, they have made a choice, and they expect you to tell them what happens, because they don't know. So you have them hooked. You can string them along a series of odd and strange events, and because they have little to no reference here. So once again, this is tabletop stuff, right? This is when I run games. My favorite thing is when a player succeeds at something really unexpected. And what happens in tabletop is the same as what happens in a video game in this case. They make a choice, and then basically they are told by me or the computer what the result of that choice is. In a tabletop perspective or situation, I get to describe something bizarre and funny and odd and be, improvise and be creative, but they get to own the action. If you've ever seen a player say that, okay, you know what, I'm gonna flip the entire galleon over in the harbor, and you go, like, how are you gonna do that? And they're like, I'm gonna get a log and I'm gonna push it in the water and just gonna pull it down and flip it, and it's gonna go do 360. And you're like, okay, sure, for the hell of it. And let's say a nat 20 does it. Doesn't necessarily do it, but for the heck of it. They are so happy and so excited that this weird, stupid thing that they wanted to do actually came through. So even though they are not deciding what is happening, and even though you are just kind of narrating it, it is their action. It is they were the funny person. They were the creative person. It was their choice, and they got to be the funny person. That is a really, really kind of huge part of all of this. Moving on. Next up, immediately connected to this, and this is less of a technique than it is kind of an approach or a philosophy, and it is that you should let the player feel funny. You shouldn't make it about yourself. Now, the single most common approach to comedy in games is the one that you usually see in point-and-click games, which are incidentally some of the most comedy-centric games there are. And that is that in the game, in the setting of the game, you, the player, are what is known as the straight man. Straight man, coincidentally, also being the most common protagonist, but not in the sense that I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about the foil, the stooge, the one who's being pitted against a wacky world or person. This is the most common way to go for obvious reasons. We, the player, we usually want a protagonist we can relate to. And they need to have similar ideas of how the world works, so they and the player can ask the same questions. If you go to a weird space planet and your player character knows how everything works, the player character doesn't really make sense for them to ask the questions that you want to know. You want them to be the same. You need to be Michael Jordan in Looney Tunes, in Space Jam, I mean. The player asks, and you get a joke in return. So in this case, the player would be setting up punchlines for the game. And that's important. They are setting up punchlines for the game. You give them the setup, and the game delivers the punchline, the funny part. Now we're already looking at ways of how to switch that dynamic up by allowing the player to express themselves in more interesting ways. But this part that I'm talking about right now is about maintaining that dynamic. When the player says or does something weird, the game needs to assume the role of the foil. If we do that, we're able to set the player up to be funny. We get to make sure that the player gets to deliver the punchline. Here's Space Jam. Writing-wise, this means more jokes, right? Like, this means more writing. It means more work, usually, but it's just work. You need to ensure that the player gets to do the funny thing and remain the funny part. Don't, like, one-up them. Don't overdo them. And that's the hard part, I think, for a lot of people. Restraint, right? Here's another tabletop experience in role-playing games. Some games that you'll play in are run by people who care very, 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 very much about their world and their lore and their world building and the story that they have in mind, and a little less so about what you as the player wants to do. They want the attention, and they want for you to appreciate what they have created. That's not just in tabletop games. You can see that in a lot of games in general, especially fantasy, where the people making the game have created this amazing, gorgeous, beautiful world of thousands of years of history and cities and forests and mountains and people and ruler, and they have sewer systems for their cities, and they really want you to know that. But nobody wants to start a game by being told 11 paragraphs of the modern day politics and the world that you're playing in. People want to do things as players. Obviously some people might be into that, but in general, a role-playing video game and a role-playing game in general should be expression for the player. You should be creating a world for them to express themselves in and do things in. And when it comes to comedy in particular, that means that you shouldn't try to hog that attention. You shouldn't try to one-up the player. You should let the player get the best parts. You should let the player say the funniest things, and then you have people in your world reacting accordingly. As everyone knows that person who will counter any story or joke with one of their own, just to kind of shift attention to themselves. And you can't afford to be that person. You have to give your player the power fantasy that they want. So let's go back to that Groznan example and the magical seed. Let's compare these two. Let's compare if the player had taken the seed. They eat the seed, and the response from the gardener is, "Oh yeah, well, good thing for me. I have 20 of those. I've established a connection to the seed dimension. I get all the seed I want from there. I'm practically chock full of seed." Which, depending on what you think is funny, may or may not be a funny line, but it immediately removes that funniness from the player. You've now built another joke instead. You've made the gardener the funny person, the wacky person. And instead, oftentimes, what is more fun is saying that, okay, I eat the seed, and having the NPC go, why would you? I literally just told you how important that thing is. What in all hells would cause you to do something so monumentally stupid? Because then we set up the player to say something along the lines of, "I've decided to become the world's first orc seed hybrid person. Would you like to make a donation to support this endeavor?" And again, these jokes are not particularly funny in this context, but the point here is that we are letting the player hit the punchline. We are letting the player say the funny thing rather than making the character do it. Everybody likes to be asked questions, and everybody, I think, to some extent, likes to talk about themselves, and that applies doubly so in role-playing games. You want to show your backstory, you want to show your character, you want to interact and do things. This is incredibly important. You have to maintain that balance. You have to maintain that feeling for the player that they got to be the creative and the funny person. Don't take it away from them. Just let them Let them be. Let them do their thing. Let them just run along on little tiny legs. Next up. Let the player make fun of you. Or let the player argue with you. This is a very direct translation from tabletop RPGs and a little harder to implement depending on the game that you are making. But I'm sharing this because in the case of Clam 2, it's been an absolute blessing for me. So in Clam Man 2, your lines are marked always by starting with you and colon. It's very typical RPG fare. There is also, however, a yourself colon. And yourself in this case is me. It's me making the game, and in turn, it's the game master of Clam Man 2. It's the voice that calls you out, stops you, or comments when you're being silly. It comments on anything you look at. It acts as your inner thoughts, and it tells you what you feel and what you see, and it's your friend and it's your enemy. It's everything that a GM does in a tabletop role-playing games. I'm not the first to do this, obviously. Disco Elysium, again, did this beautifully with a whole host of statistics or stats that are talking back to you, parts of your being that kind of inform you. And if there's anything I've learned from being a GM is that players do love to argue, not necessarily maliciously, not rules lawyer or disrupt the game, but I mean, there are people who do that too, but kind of arguing in this kind of teasing, fun kind of way. As an example, you'll have the player say something like, I attack him. And you as the GM just go, okay, go ahead and roll your attack. The player will ask, is he flanked? Do I get advantage? And you say no, because he's not. And the player says, well, he's in between me and the chair I sat on, though. At that point you're going, yes, that's technically true. And the player goes, well, I sat on that chair for a while, so my ass has imbued that chair with some aspect of me, and that aspect of me is within 5 feet of him, and I am on the opposite side. So technically, I am flanking. And obviously you say, no, he's not flanked by your ass residue. Go ahead and roll. And the player kind of chuckles to themselves. They got a little bit of an emotional reaction out of you. And it's all in good sport. It's all in good fun. And the reason a tabletop player might do this is because the GM runs the game. They run it according to rules. The rules that are, when you look at a video game, even more rigid. So when you playfully argue or joke about something, you get to release some of the tension that those rules bring with them. And when you do this in a video game, you are directly arguing with the game. Don't get me wrong, I'm still the one who's writing these dialogue options. I'm still the one writing the player arguing with me. But again, the player gets to claim ownership and argue. And this can be even more efficient when every once in a while you purposefully let the player argue their way out of a situation. Or, you let them talk you into, being more lenient about something. Maybe you failed a dice check and the player has a dialogue option that says, I don't think that's fair. You go, well, what do you mean that's not fair? Well, it's the dice roll, it's just RNG. I shouldn't just lose because of that, etc., back and forth. And eventually you as the GM or as the game can just go, all right, fine, you succeed. Are you happy now? And that's the choice that the player made, right? That's the path they went down. They went arguing, and you let them affect the game, the rules of the game, and that feels great. You are the foil to their nonsense, right? This is not just arguing with an NPC, it's arguing with the game itself. And they get to feel like they're trolling. They're having fun at your expense. They got away with something. They beat the system. They got to troll you and bait you and cause something of an emotional reaction from the game. All in good fun. And once again, they get to be the funny person. In this instance, they get to be the funny person as the player, even. Moving on to something that's very important to me as well, and this is making failure fun or digestible. Now, failure in video games is obviously commonplace. Some even claim that for a game to be a game, there needs to be a fail state, but it's hard to define what is a game exactly, and you get into layers on layers on layers on layers, and eventually nobody really cares that much in practice. But there is a common kind of thing in games that says that you have to be able to lose, you have to be able to game over. And it's a little less true in narrative games, but it does touch on something that is very important, that it's a little broader and far more important, actually. and that is that there should be some amount of stakes. And if there are not stakes, then they should be a goal. The thing about goals is that in a lot of games, going back to Monkey Island, Monkey Island, you cannot fail. You cannot lose. In the LucasArts adventure games, you could not lose. You could never soft lock. In the Sierra games, you could. You forget to pick up a plunger in the first 10 minutes and you are done for in the 8th hour of the game because you need a plunger and there is no one in sight. In LucasArts games, you could never fail. The only way you fail is by you don't know what to do and you stop playing. And that is kind of your game over. There is no game over screen where you die or something. There should be some amount of stakes, though. There should be some amount of win and lose, especially in a game with RNG or dice rolls, which is oftentimes the case with role-playing games. The thing is, however, that failure in role-playing games is very, very often completely up to RNG, as modified by your statistics or your character build. RNG being a random number generator in this case, or a dice roll, basically. They are also usually cutting you out of content, meaning that if you want to interact with something and you do a dice roll for it, if you fail, very, very often what the game will just tell you is, you failed. You don't get to see that thing. We, made a random number for you, and it turns out that random number was not high enough. So yeah, you don't get to see this part of the game. Now, there is a place for that in video games, but eventually, looking at it as sort of a shortcut to finishing a dialogue if you fail versus succeeding and going into a whole another branching tree of talking, of conversation, it's not very interesting. It's not very fun. And that brings us to the third point. Failing an ability check is just not fun. There is no part of it that is interesting or exciting. It's just frustrating. If you, as the party, as the player, go to the shopkeeper and say, "I would like some chocolate, please," and the shopkeeper goes into the back and does a perception check to see whether or not they have chocolate, and he fails, and it's like, "I don't have any chocolate, sorry, goodbye." That's the end of it. It's not very interesting anymore. Now, you can go around that mechanically by having, sneak around and go in and check for chocolate yourself, but is that really the best we can do? I think what we can do with ability checks in video games, and what I've been trying to do, at least with Clanman, is make sure that they are still RNG. There should still be stakes. There should still be a failure and a victory or success condition. But failing shouldn't pass you by. It shouldn't cut you out of content. It should give you unexpected content. In the same way that, do you want to go left and right is a choice. If you roll the dice and you want to go right and you fail, and the game tells you you have to go left now, then left should be equally interesting. There should be something fun there. There should be something else there. And I feel like we're missing out on a lot of choice and interesting narrative in that failure isn't made interesting. Failure is usually just like a hard stop. That no, you don't get to see that because you failed. That's that. And that touches on the last point, which is letting the player maintain their integrity. Losing isn't fun. Failing is not fun. It is, it's not fun. It kind of sucks. But if you can let your players lose in a way that is interesting, then people will be far more ready for it. Clanman 2, again, the joke system that I mentioned, basically has you roll the dice every time you tell a joke. And if you succeed, you tell the joke well, and you make people laugh. Oftentimes, those jokes that you actually tell diegetically in-game are less fun because they are set up as jokes, and then you read them as jokes, and people laugh, and it's not very interesting. When you fail a joke in Clanman, something awful usually happens. You go down a completely different path of logic that leads you to an awful conclusion that that hurts or offends people. Again, not maliciously, but in kind of weird, silly way. You start sweating because you're so nervous and that you lose all the body liquid, and it kind of drains down below and you turn into a small sponge, and then you reverse and you kind of go back to that. Or you have a long kind of conversation about what is morally correct about this joke, and then you realize that 10 minutes have passed and you haven't told a joke. The failures in Clan 2 are more often than not more fun than succeeding, because the player needs to, they need to get something. They need to be interesting. They need to get something out of it. Again, in a tabletop role-playing game, if a player fails something, don't tell them, oh yeah, now you see nothing, if they're trying to look in the dark. It's like, yep, nothing. You don't see anything. Because that sucks for the player. They wanted to see in the dark. So instead, give them something interesting. Give them something like, you are very tired, you're exhausted, sweat is kind of gathering in your brow, and you're having a hard time focusing just because of the exhaustion, because now something else is happening. You're giving them something else to build on. And you are letting them maintain their integrity, and as such, you are rewarding their resilience. They are doing their best. They are trying their hardest. They failed due to a dice roll. That should give them something else to go on. And that's not that's not a participation award thing. It's a question of, there are interesting things that we can do with failure, but for some reason in RPGs, we're just not doing them. So, in summary, we're going to go back to all the things that we talked about just now. The important things you can do is, one, when intent is clear, you can go for style. And that means flavoring. Flavoring. I did it. I said it 3 times. 2, let the player say and do the subversive. Let them be the wacky character in the world. Let them say the bard line. 3, maintain that dynamic. Let them continuously be funny. Let them be silly, and have the game recognize that, and have them feel recognized because of that. 4, let the player make fun of you. Let the player troll you. It's a game. They're going to ridicule it. They're going to make fun of it. They're going to say, oh, I wish I could do this. Wish I could do that. Let them express that. Let them feel like they are being creative. And when you do that through dialogue, it's a very rewarding feeling. It's a fun feeling, like you're beating the system. And finally, again, let the player maintain integrity through failure. Don't say that they fail and break their leg and that's it. Give them a moment at the hospital where they're getting their leg back together and they're talking to someone else who's like, oh, you broke your leg too here. Like, this is what I do when I break my legs because I do it all the time. I don't know. Something like that. Now, if you look at these 5 things and you say, all right, if I do all these things, will my game be funny? Well, no, this is the approach. This is the stylistic kind of guide and philosophy that you can go on. The writing itself, the jokes themselves, that's up to you as a writer to make sure that they're funny. But hopefully, these are steps that will kind of help you just kind of enrich choices and enrich player agency and expression, specifically in comedic circumstances or context, but also in general in role-playing games. Hopefully. That is the end. Thank you all so much for coming and listening, and I hope this was engaging and interesting. My name again is Martin Hanses. If you want to discuss this further with me, you can send me an email. The email address is on the screen right now, and you can message me on Twitter and tell me how wrong I am, or how right I am, or whatever fun ideas or thoughts that you may have. Again, this isn't the final part of it. This is just sort of exploring and looking into things and seeing if we can make it more interesting and more fun in the future, and in the games that are to come, and the games that we are to write. Thank you so much, WordPlay, for letting me do this. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your patience and your help with everything. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone who helped me with this talk as well. That is all. Have a good one, and good luck with whatever you're working on and whatever you're writing. See ya.
I feel like we've been in the uh-oh phase.
Yeah, what is more uh-oh?
Overcome the complication to completely succeed.
That's like a fairly good ending, I think. Yeah, that's like a.
Live on, long face. Live on.
The curse was real all along.
Oh frick, Karen took the kids again. Deal with it, she.
Here, this cat is clearly cute.
The defense has no objections to this claim. It is a very cute cat.
Sustained. The cat is totes adorbs. What does that have to do with the matter at hand?
What would a real lawyer say in this situation?
It is not a scam. I gave him a tattoo, just like he asked me to.
Exactly. It would be a scam if she took his money and ran, but instead she gave him the tattoo, as promised.
It is not as promised, and I've got evidence to prove it.
Objection! You've got it backwards! If Marianne was posting political photos from the Vote Hayworth or Die group, that gives Christy the motive to unfriend her!
Sounds good to me. Let me just add her to the call. Oh, jeez, hang on.
This year is just for me. Through all my trials and tribulations, I'm stuck in this place. 'Cause my heart
Hi, I'm Guilherme Bongini, and this is Loopy Lore. Loopy Lore is a co-op card game where players work together to tell a story they know nothing about. Each round, players take turns as the narrator, flipping a card and then narrating the events of the story based on the card's contents and their own imagination. At the very beginning, the group flips a set of 7 cards. These cards will lay out the foundation of their story. It will tell them what the story is about, in what setting it takes place, who the protagonist of this story is, where they are at the beginning of the story, and finally, the last 3 cards are the ending cards, how the story has to end for the group to win the game. They have to build the story, and it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. They pick one of the 13 instruction templates, draw the corresponding card and put the face down on the table without looking, and finally hand out to each player the corresponding number of plot twist cards. The active player picks one face down card, flips it, and they have 30 seconds on the clock to talk about it. They can narrate however they desire and take the story in whatever direction they want, as long as they mention the content of the card at least once in their narration. Once their time is up, the next player flips a new card and continues in the same manner from where the previous player left off. However, the other players aren't just listening to the narration. At any moment, they can play a plot twist card to throw the story for a loop. These cards contain wild twists or hilarious cues for the narrator to try and include in their narration. Plot twists give the group plenty of benefits as well, such as freezing the timer for the narrator to try and gather their thoughts, and giving whoever played the plot twist the ability to look at one unflipped card and peek ahead in the story to see where it's going.
And that, WordPlay, was Loopy Lore. If you want to check out this low-stakes, fast-paced game of collaborative storytelling, we have a version available on itch.io, so you can download and play with your friends at home, Or if you have Tabletop Simulator, we have a free mod available up on Steam right this second. Go check us out, and I hope you all weave some incredible tales together.
Nobody does it quite like you. No, 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 nobody does it
And that's a wrap for Wordplay 2021. We still can't believe we've been able to keep this festival going on throughout a pandemic, but we couldn't have done it without our members, our sponsors, volunteers, friends, family, everyone. Thank you so much for making this happen. We're so excited for what we have coming up. We have lots of ideas, and we can't wait to share them with you. But again, thank you so much for making this happen. Don't forget to check out the games and support the creators. They love that. Although WordPlay is over, it's only for now. And we hope to see you at more games next year. Stay safe, stay inside, and play some games. Peace.